Chapter 2948. After drifting on the sea for another 3 days, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three suddenly realized that there was a faint golden barrier in front of them. The barrier was transparent, and if it weren't for the golden sunlight reflecting off it, it wouldn't have been discovered at all. Taking a closer look, everyone realized that the size of the barrier was simply astonishing. Looking around, the entire sea seemed to be divided into two by the barrier. No matter if it was the left or the right, they couldn't see the end of it. This barrier should be the isolation barrier of Penglai Island. Di Baichen looked at the incomparably shocking barrier in front of him. His heart was also filled with shock. Everyone was familiar with the barrier, especially on the battle stage. However, such a huge barrier was truly shocking. At the very least, they had never heard of such a thing. When Ziren nodded, "My old man said that when we're about to reach Penglai Island, we'll pass through a barrier. Only those who have reached the 5th level of the Purple Realm, or those who have other methods, can pass through it. If you don't meet the requirements, you won't be able to pass through this barrier no matter what. Now, I'm still wondering what this barrier looks like. Now that I've seen it, I've really learned something new. Master, I have a feeling that the people on Penglai Island aren't simple. To be able to set up such a perverted barrier, how strong must they be?" Xiao He was secretly speechless. Both of its hands were constantly scratching its white fur. Before they even reached Penglai Island, they were already shocked by the various foundations of Penglai Island. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. Penglai Island is indeed not to be underestimated. We just need to be more careful. In a place like this, the cultivation resources and other things are often incomparable to other places. Once a cultivator reaches the Purple Realm, their cultivation speed will greatly decrease. I think that only by going to a place like this can we increase our cultivation faster. Where there were opportunities, there were always risks. This was a common understanding among all of them. Compared to encountering danger, stagnation was the scariest. Soon, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three arrived in front of the barrier. Reaching out their hands to touch it, everyone realized that the barrier was like a wall with a real touch. No matter how hard they tried, the barrier didn't react at all. After carefully sensing it, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were able to determine that the barrier was able to withstand a shocking amount of power. Even if a 9th-level Purple Realm cultivator were to attack it, it would not be affected at all. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three looked at each other and nodded. In the next second, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen activated their blood aura fields at almost the same time, and a tyrannical power instantly erupted. The two of them were not even at the 5th level of the Purple Realm, so the only way they could enter the barrier was by relying on the blood aura field. After Bailey Hongzhuang and Shi Feng displayed their blood aura fields, Bailey Hongzhuang was surprised to discover that ripples had appeared on the previously immovable barrier. It was as if the barrier had turned into mist. Bailey Hongzhuang tried to take a step forward. Then, she passed through the barrier and appeared on the other side. Chapter 2949. Seeing this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang's dark eyes, like black diamonds, could not help but flash with a touch of amazement. The setup of this barrier was really amazing, and the perception was so obvious. They had just used the blood chi field, and everything went smoothly. On the other side, when Ziren and Shangguan Yingying took out a hexagonal token from their Qiankuan bag. After they injected their yuan qi into the token, a bright golden light bloomed from the token. The golden energy seemed to have merged with the barrier, and ripples spread out on the barrier. At the same time, when Ziren and Shangguan Yingying also successfully passed through the barrier. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen looked at Shangguan Yingying's strange token and method, and a hint of surprise appeared in their eyes, but they didn't ask. Everyone had their own secrets, even if they were partners in life and death. Wanting to know all the methods of the other was never a wise move. After when Ziren successfully passed through, he also breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, my old man didn't lie to me. Otherwise, if we were blocked here, Wouldn't I be angered to death? Bei Chen's lips curled into a smile. Although Sect Master One doesn't like to talk on weekdays, what he says is never false. Xiren nodded and said, "That's true. After we pass through this barrier, we should be able to reach Penglai Island soon. It seems like we have to start preparing." When these words came out, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's faces simultaneously showed a heavy expression. It would be fine if they didn't have any opponents, but according to their estimates, Gao Hanchun had been waiting for them to appear. Gao Hanchun probably knew how long it would take to reach Penglai Island from Monkey Island. They were most worried that once they reached Penglai Island, they would be targeted by Gao Hanchun. That would be really troublesome. After the boat drifted for 6 hours, an island slowly appeared in the sight of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three. This island was undoubtedly much larger than the Monkey Island they had seen before. It was at least several times larger than the Monkey Island they had seen before. Looking at the island from afar, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other three's eyes lit up, and a trace of excitement appeared in their hearts. After drifting on the sea for so long, we finally see the true face of Penglai Island. It's hidden too well. If we weren't sure that it was here, we wouldn't have been able to persevere all the way here. Xiren shook his head. Previously, they were wondering why the ordinary people of Xingxian continent had never discovered Penglai Island. As a matter of fact, after drifting on the sea for nearly a month, as long as one wasn't stupid, they wouldn't have the sudden idea to attempt such a thing. I really miss the feeling of having my feet on the ground. I really want to go ashore as soon as possible. Shangguan Yingying had a joyful smile on her lip. Her eyes were as bright as the stars. Obviously, she was full of hope for Penglai Island. Bei Chen looked at the sky and said, "In my opinion, we should wait until the night is dark before going ashore." "It's late at night." Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. "It's best if we split into 2 groups. That way the target will be smaller." Chapter 2950. However, the appearance of 4 people together would inevitably arouse suspicion. After all, there were too few newcomers appearing every day. As long as it was confirmed that it was a team of 4, it would not be far from the truth. "Then you and Beichen will be in a team, and I will be in a team with Yingying. We will act separately at night and meet up again when we reach the island?" When Xiren suggested. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded her head lightly. Her originally beautiful face had disappeared and was replaced by a young man of about 25 years old. His appearance could only be said to be delicate and pretty, but not very eye-catching. Not only Bailey Hongzhuang, Beichen and Xiren had also concealed their usual handsome appearance and changed into an ordinary appearance. At least, it would not be unforgettable and leave a deep impression on others. Shangguan Yingying did not disguise herself as a woman. She was still dressed as a woman, and her appearance had also become delicate and pretty, giving off the feeling of a pretty girl from a humble family. The 4 of them had changed from the extremely eye-catching team of 2 men and 2 women to an ordinary team of 3 men and 1 woman. They believed that as long as Gao Hanchun did not have any special methods, it would be impossible for him to recognize the 4 of them. The night gradually thickened, and when the surroundings were completely dark, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 separated into 2 groups and rowed their boats to the shore. Bailey Hongzhuang followed behind Beichen. Now that Beichen was her big brother, and since it was a pretense, Bailey Hongzhuang also acted very well. No matter whether it was her actions or words, no one would suspect that she was not a real man. After the 2 of them went ashore, they immediately stored their boat. Once again feeling the feeling of being on solid ground, the 2 of them felt a sense of relief, but neither of them let down their guard. When the 2 of them went ashore, they realized that there were other people preparing to leave. The entire pier was not as deserted as they thought. On the contrary, it was very lively. Bright lights illuminated the entire pier, and bursts of conversation and laughter entered the ears of Bailey Hongzhuang and Shangguan Ying. Bailey Hongzhuang and Beichen looked at each other and smiled at the same time. It seemed that the situation was much better than they had imagined. If they were the only ones on the shore, it would be easy for them to be targeted. However, with so many people here, it would be easy for them to be discovered. Even if Gao Hanchuan's methods were not weak, it was impossible for him to keep an eye on the pier every day. Whenever someone came ashore, he would arrest them to confirm their identity. There are still so many people leaving at night. Could it be that they are returning to the Shengxian continent? Baisher was puzzled. With so many people leaving together, it didn't seem like it. I don't think so. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head. Penglai Island isn't just an island, but a combination of many islands. It's just that the largest and most famous island is called Penglai Island. We can't be sure which island we are on right now. It's very likely that these people are heading to another island. That's right. I heard the name of another island from their discussion just now. Di Baichen replied. Let's find an inn to stay in first. I'm sure that we'll be able to obtain quite a bit of useful information. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with a wise light. Obtaining information from the mouth of a waiter was undoubtedly the easiest and fastest way to obtain information. However, the people who came here were all experts above the 5th level of the Purple Realm. Would there really be a waiter here? Chapter 2951. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen walked all the way to the shore. Even though it was already nighttime, the entire island was still brightly lit and very lively. Along the way from the dock, there were lanterns hanging on both sides of the road. The road was long and lit up. What was different from ordinary cities was that there were no hawkers on the road here. However, the shops on both sides of the road were still full of everything. It was much better than what Bailey Hongzhuang and the others had imagined. The two walked directly into the first inn. This was what they had agreed with Xiren. They would go ashore in batches and finally gather at the first inn. Shopkeeper, we want a guest room, Di Baichen said slowly. Seeing that there were guests, the shopkeeper's face immediately hung a smile. 2 guests, the upper room costs 1 low-grade spirit stone per night. How many nights would you like to stay? As soon as the words came out, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen couldn't help but look at each other. Their eyes flashed with a touch of doubt. Low-grade spirit stone? Could it be that the money of Penglai Island and the money of Shengxian continent were not the same? The shopkeeper nodded. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen's confused look, he also understood. I'm afraid the 2 of you are new to Penglai Island. The shopkeeper lowered his voice to prevent the cultivators eating in the lobby from hearing. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen nodded. Since they didn't know anything, it was better to take advantage of this opportunity to learn more. No wonder. The shopkeeper's face showed a smile of understanding. Penglai Island is different from the outside world. The common currency here is spirit stone. Ordinary money has no use here. The 2 of you are new here, so it's normal that you don't understand the situation. As long as you go to the square tomorrow to register your information, you will receive your first batch of spirit stones. However, after receiving this first batch of spirit stones, you will have to rely on yourselves to earn the rest. Listening to the shopkeeper's introduction, Bailey Hongzhuang and Lin Mingya's faces revealed a look of realization. Coming to Penglai Island was indeed like coming to a new world. Even the common currency had changed. In Bailey Hongzhuang's mind, she vaguely understood that the stones filled with energy fluctuations in Gao Hanxia and Gao Hanxia's Qiankuan bags were the spirit stones that the shopkeeper had mentioned. Since the 2 of you are new here today, why don't you stay here for the time being and pay the bill after you collect the spirit stones tomorrow? The shopkeeper had a kind smile on his face, but such kind words made Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen shocked. This shopkeeper was so kind. Was he not afraid that they would leave on credit? However, the shopkeeper's next sentence made them understand where his confidence came from. Penglai Island has a very strict punishment for people who buy on credit. If you dare to buy on credit, as long as you haven't left the island, you will definitely be caught. Since the two of you are new to Penglai Island, I advise you not to try it so easily. Thank you, shopkeeper. We will definitely pay in full tomorrow. Bachin bowed. The shopkeeper nodded with satisfaction. He waved his hand to the waiter behind him and said, "Bring the two guests to the upper room." The waiter quickly greeted them, and led Bailey Hongzhuang and Lin Mingya upstairs. Chapter 29:52. Just as the waiter was about to leave, Bailey Hongzhuang waved her hand and said, "Wait, little brother. Don't be in such a hurry to leave." Hearing this, the waiter was slightly stunned. Then he closed the door and walked in front of Bailey Hongzhuang and Bachin. "What do the two guests want to know? As long as you can pay, I will tell you everything I know." If it was a normal day, there would be no problem with paying some compensation. However, they had just shown in front of the shopkeeper that they were newcomers. It would be inappropriate to take out the spirit stones now. It was hard to imagine that with Bailey Hongzhuang and Bachin's status, they would still have such a difficult time. In the next second, Bailey Hongzhuang took out a white porcelain bottle from her Qiankuan bag and said, "Is this Dan okay?" The waiter took the Dan and looked at it. Suddenly, the smile on his face became wider. Yes, of course. The value of this Dan was much higher than the low-grade spirit stones. The waiter understood that it must be because Bailey Hongzhuang and Bachin did not understand the value of Penglai Island and the spirit stones. Such a good thing could only be obtained from the hands of a cultivator who had just arrived. If it was someone else who was familiar with Penglai Island, it would definitely be impossible. What do the two of you want to know? As long as it is something I know, I will never lie to you. The waiter's attitude was very enthusiastic. Since he had received such a great benefit, he naturally would not hide anything. "Little brother, I heard that only cultivators who have reached the 5th level of the Purple Realm can enter Penglai Island. Why is your cultivation not at that level?" Bailey Hongzhuang asked the question in her heart. Not only the waiter, but even the shopkeeper's cultivation was far from the 5th level of the Purple Realm. When she first entered the restaurant, she felt that this was very strange. It was just that she never had the chance to ask. Hearing this, the waiter smiled and said, "Guests, there is something you don't know. If everyone here is at the 5th level of the Purple Realm, would you come to Penglai Island to open a shop or serve people with such cultivation?" Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head. "Of course not." "That's right." The waiter continued, "The cultivators here are all above the 5th level of the Purple Realm. However, there are also many ordinary people on the island. Not all of them are masters. However, these 2 points do not conflict. Other than the people in the shop, everyone else you see should be masters." "How did you come to Penglai Island?" Bachin asked in a deep voice. "Actually, people like us with ordinary cultivations are the descendants of former experts. It's just that due to the limitations of our talent, we weren't able to cultivate to that level. However, once we cultivate to that level, we can no longer be servants. We can directly become free cultivators like you all. Even though we've been busy in the shop, we've never given up on cultivating. However, if we want to cultivate wholeheartedly, it is not possible. Unless we leave Penglai Island and cultivate to the 5th level of the Purple Realm, and then come back. Compared to the outside world, the cultivation resources on Penglai Island are much more abundant. The cultivation speed here is faster. However, there is no lack of people who want to go to the outside world to enjoy glory and wealth." Chapter 29:53. The attendant waved his hand. "That won't happen. Every island has its own guards to maintain the order of the island. For example, our Emerald Island has its own Emerald Guard. It has nothing to do with the conflicts between cultivators, but if it involves ordinary people, then it won't do. They will definitely be arrested by the guards. As for the consequences of being arrested, we don't know if they will die or become disabled. Two guests, the order of our Emerald Island is different from the outside world. You must not do anything out of line. Otherwise, once you are arrested by the guards, The consequences are not something you can bear. Our shopkeeper is not afraid of you buying on credit for this reason. All the shops on the island have to pay spirit stones to the guards. This also involves their own interest. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen nodded slightly. In their minds, they already had some understanding of the guards. They were like the city guards, but their strength was much stronger than the city guards. A 5th-level Purple Realm cultivator, in any place in the Shengxian continent, could do whatever they wanted. But here, they must not offend the guards. One could imagine the strength of the guards. Then who are the people in the guards? Why can they become guards? Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were filled with doubt. The guards were so orderly, and everyone on the island had to obey the order. There should be a certain force behind them. It was impossible for them to be formed by themselves. The guards are from the 3 major forces of Penglai Island. Different islands are under the jurisdiction of different forces. Hearing the attendant's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen's eyes suddenly brightened. Little brother, please introduce us to the major forces of Penglai Island. We can also avoid them. As they were new here, it was most important to know which forces they could not offend. Not only that, until now, they still did not know which force Gao Hanchun belonged to. It would be best if they could find out more. The attendant was not surprised by Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen's question. In fact, almost every cultivator who came to Penglai Island for the first time would ask this question. This was because this problem would affect their future development. If they were careless and offended someone from a major power, they would die without knowing why. On our Penglai Island, there are a total of 3 major powers. They are Penglai Palace, 100 Flower Gate, and Crimson Moon Sect. The Penglai Palace, as the name suggests, is located on the island of Penglai. The Penglai Palace is extremely powerful and has many disciples. The 100 Flowers Gate was located on the 100 Flowers Island. However, the 100 Flowers Gate specialized in medicine and was famous for their pills. However, they could not be underestimated because of this. They had an astonishing number of hired thugs. The Crimson Moon Sect was located on the Crimson Moon Island. These 3 islands were named after the forces. Furthermore, the 3 islands were not far from each other. It could be said that they balanced each other out. As for our Jade Island, it's called Jade Island because this island is rich in jade. Other than these 3 major forces, there was another force that no one could ignore, and that was the Golden Flame Auction House. Chapter 2954. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen nodded. In fact, no matter where it was, the power of an auction house could not be underestimated. Without sufficient strength and means, it was absolutely impossible to collect so many treasures. Moreover, if an auction house wanted to run well, it must have powerful strength to deter others. Otherwise, if there were too many people who did not abide by the rules, the auction house would naturally be unable to continue. No one would ignore an auction house that could do well on Penglai Island. In addition to the 4 most famous forces, there are many small forces on Penglai Island. However, there are too many of them. Every island has one. Even though I have lived here since I was a child, I am not very clear about many forces. After all, the changes on Penglai Island are too fast. Maybe a force was very powerful a few days ago, but after a few days, it will be replaced directly. When talking about these forces, the attendant seemed to be very indifferent. Obviously, it was because there were too many of these forces. Except for the 4 most feared forces, the other forces were really nothing. I wonder if you have heard of Gao Hanchun? Bailey Hongzhuang immediately asked. According to her estimation, this Gao Hanchun should not be a member of the 4 major forces. It was very likely that he was the leader of many small forces. In order to avoid the situation where the other party was in the dark and they were in the light, they first had to have some understanding of Gao Hanchun. Only then could they be more careful when taking action in the future. Gao Hanchun. The attendant was slightly stunned. Why are you asking about him? When we were at the dock, we heard other teams talking about him. He seemed to be very powerful, so we asked out of curiosity. D. Bachan's face revealed a very curious look, as if he wanted to know the gossip. Hearing this, the attendant also smiled. This kind of herd mentality was something that almost every newcomer would have. That Gao Hanchun is indeed a very famous person recently. However, he does not belong to the four major forces. He created his own force called the Heaven-Shaking Faction. In Penglai Island, other than the three major forces, the other forces can only be called a gang. However, the strength of this Heaven-Shaking Faction is indeed not to be underestimated. Recently, there have been many people talking about this Heaven-Shaking Faction, so it is not strange for you to hear about it. In that case, that Gao Hanchun is indeed very powerful. To be able to enjoy such an illustrious reputation on the Penglai Island, he is truly extraordinary. Bailey Hongzhuang pretended to exclaim in admiration, her expression full of yearning. The Heaven-Shaking Faction is not on our Emerald Island, but on Qinyun Island, which is quite a distance away from our Emerald Island. Speaking of the Heaven-Shaking Faction, I remember a piece of gossip I heard recently. If you're interested, I'll tell you about it. The more the attendant spoke, the more excited he became. Although ordinary people were usually protected by the guards, their status was still incomparable to cultivators. Even if he wanted to brag and show off, he didn't have much of a chance to do so. Only in front of newcomers like D. Bachan would he be able to be so proud of himself. Of course I'm interested. Chapter 2955. It is precisely because of this matter that the people of Jintian faction went to many islands recently. There are also people of Jintian faction on our Emerald Island, in order to find the murderer. Speaking of which, the other party is really daring, even daring to kill the younger brother of Jintian faction's leader. However, it is said that the people of Jintian faction haven't found the existence of those people after searching for so long. I think that those people might not even dare to come to Penglai Island. If they are caught, only death awaits them. The waiter said while shaking his head. Obviously, this matter was already known to everyone. I don't know who is so daring. Do you know who the other party is? Bailey Hongzhuang asked, but deep in her eyes, a trace of sharpness quietly flashed. It seems that Gao Hanxiao and his brother didn't say anything on this point. Gao Hanchun was really not an easy person to deal with. From the words of the waiter, it was clear that Jintian faction was very powerful among the many factions. Gao Hanchun actually sent the people of Jintian faction to various islands to find them. Obviously, he wouldn't give up until he caught them. The waiter shook his head. We don't know what they look like, we only know that there are 2 men and 2 women, and they are very young. Gao Hanchun left an image on his 2 younger brothers, and saw the appearance of the 4 people. So recently, as long as it is a newcomer, they will be carefully checked. You 2 are also newcomers. Maybe tomorrow you will meet the people of Jintian faction, but as long as you answer truthfully, there should be no problem, as long as you don't offend them. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and D. Bachan quietly looked at each other. It seems that they were lucky not to be discovered tonight, but they still can't escape the questioning of Jintian faction. However, at least they have a better understanding, and can make more preparations. After getting enough information from the waiter left the room. Bailey Hongzhuang and D. Bachan walked to the window and looked at the pedestrians below. According to their estimation, it was about time for Wen Ziren and Shangguan Yingying to arrive at the restaurant. It was fine if the 2 of them were discovered as newcomers, but Wen Ziren and Shangguan Yingying absolutely could not be discovered. Otherwise, if the 4 newcomers stayed in the same inn, it would be easy to connect the dots. The 2 of them looked out the window for a moment and saw Ziren and Shangguan Yingying slowly walking over. D. Bachan immediately transmitted his voice to Ziren and Shangguan Yingying, telling them what spirit stones were so that they wouldn't be exposed when they checked into the inn later. Downstairs, Ziren nodded quietly after hearing D. Bachan's voice transmission, indicating that he understood. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen then closed the window. Not long after, someone knocked on the door. It was Shangguan, Yingying and Ziren. "What's the situation?" When Ziren couldn't help but ask, "Were you also tracked on the way here?" Di Beichen shook his head slightly. "No, but I'm afraid we will meet the people of Zhentian faction tomorrow." "What do you mean?" When Ziren was confused. They went ashore very smoothly and didn't meet anyone at all. They thought they could relax, but now looking at Bailey Hongzhuang and Shangguan Yingying's expression, they felt that the situation was not as simple as they thought. Chapter 2956. So, the reason why we weren't blocked at the pier tonight was because the Shocking Heaven factions people were guarding the square? When Ziren said in a deep voice. Di Beichen nodded. "That's right, any cultivator who just arrived here without spirit stones can't survive on this Penglai island, so they must go to the square to register and receive the spirit stones. They don't need to guard the pier at all because there are many people coming and going at the pier. Even if the Shocking Heaven faction is quite strong, they can't stop so many people from dissatisfied. What's more, there are so many people coming and going at the pier, they can't judge who is a newcomer, but as long as someone goes to receive the spirit stones, they must be newcomers, plus they don't have any background, they don't need to be afraid at all." When Ziren frowned, "This Gao Hanchun is really smart, he has already calculated all of this, isn't it very troublesome? Fortunately, the two of you haven't been discovered, it's just me and Beichen, it shouldn't be too difficult to get through. The shopkeeper already knows that Beichen and I are newcomers today, so we must go to the square tomorrow to receive the spirit stones, otherwise it will be more suspicious if we hide. The two of you simply don't need to receive the spirit stones, we will think of a way to get the spirit stones later. As long as the four of you don't appear together, it's reasonable to say that the Shocking Heaven faction is difficult to determine." Her clear and bright phoenix eyes flashed with wisdom. Bailey Hongzhuang thought about the situation in front of her, and already had some plans in her heart. Shangguan Yingying nodded. "Hongzhuang is right, let's do it, but the two of you have to be more careful tomorrow. Don't worry, although Gao Hanchun hates us to the bone, the people he sent to the Emerald Island are just ordinary people, as long as we are careful, it won't be difficult to get through." Di Beichen smiled faintly. Even if they were heavily guarded now, it wouldn't make them panic. "I also don't believe that those guys are so smart, let's go to the square tomorrow and see the situation." The tension on Ziren's face dissipated a little. "I'll go order some wine and dishes, and see how the wine and dishes on Penglai Island taste. Speaking of which, it's all thanks to the spirit stones in Gao Hansha's Qiankuan bag, there are more than 200 pieces. At least we don't need to worry for a short time. These spirit stones are used to help cultivators cultivate, it's because every cultivator needs it, Penglai Island's currency. We should find a way to get more spirit stones as soon as possible." Di Beichen's voice was slightly heavy. This spirit stone was a great weapon to improve their cultivation. Other things were not what they were most worried about right now. What they were most worried about was that their cultivation was not enough. In such a situation, they simply can't fight with others. SSSSST. If that was the case, there would be endless troubles. If he wanted to get rid of this weakness, he had to raise his cultivation as soon as possible. Unfortunately, to advance from the 3rd level of the Purple Realm to the 5th level of the Purple Realm was definitely not something that could be achieved in a short period of time. During this period of time, they had to be extra careful and avoid conflicts with others. Chapter 2957. The four of them looked at each other. With their status, they had never worried about money. They never thought that after coming to Penglai Island, they would experience the feeling of poverty. This feeling of being unable to make ends meet really made them feel a little helpless. "We'll think of a way to solve this problem tomorrow." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. "Although we don't need gold coins here, Dan pills are hard currency no matter what." Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Di Beichen and the other two's gazes fell on her. Speaking of which, the three of them were all cultivators. It was indeed a very difficult thing for them to earn spirit stones. However, with a genius alchemist like Bailey Hongzhuang, earning spirit stones would not be so difficult. Alchemists, those were the rich among the rich. We have prepared a lot of pills. If it doesn't work, we'll exchange them for some spirit stones. Di Baichen said slowly, however, the value of spirit stones here is very high. I'm afraid that the amount of spirit stones we can exchange for will not be too much. Bailey Hongzhuang came to Penglai Island. It was naturally very important for her to improve her cultivation. How could she spend all her time on alchemy? Forget it. We'll take it one step at a time. We'll find a way. Ziren waved his hand. A relaxed expression appeared between his eyebrows. If there's really no way to earn spirit stones, then how did the cultivators on Penglai Island survive? Haha, that makes sense. Di Baichen laughed heartily. It was meaningless to worry too much. Once they had a better understanding of Penglai Island, there would be a way. I'll go order some food and wine first. The most important thing is to fill our stomachs. With that, Ziren and Shangguan Yingying walked out of the house and went downstairs to order food and wine. After the food and wine were sent to Ziren's house, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen entered Ziren's room. The next day, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen went to the square of the Emerald Island under the guidance of the shopkeeper. During the day, Emerald Island was even more lively than at night. Pedestrians could be seen everywhere, but all of them were cultivators. Walking on the streets, Bailey Hongzhuang exclaimed inwardly when she sensed the elemental energy waves emitted from the bodies of the pedestrians. If the people of Penglai Island appeared in the outside world at the same time, it would cause a huge commotion in the Shengxian continent. It was this feeling that made Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen nervous. For the sake of their loved ones, they had to increase their strength. The people here were enough to threaten the existence of Tiangang's sect. When Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen arrived at the square, they saw a huge square sitting on the flat ground. The whole square was white. At a glance, it looked very clean, simple, and practical. There were 4 stages in this square. Although it was the first time that Bailey Hongzhuang came to this square, she could roughly guess that these 4 stages were fighting stages. In other words, it was likely to be a place for life and death battles. If there was a big grudge between cultivators, it was very likely that they would settle it on these stages. At the same time, it was also a place for everyone to witness. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen did not stay in the square for too long. Instead, they went directly to a building next to the square. Chapter 2958. After Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen walked in, 2 people in a tea house outside the square looked at each other and couldn't help but put down their teacup. Their eyes flashed with a touch of light. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen walked into the house together. It was different from what they had imagined. The furnishings in the house were very ordinary and didn't give off a grand feeling. According to the waiter, the registration of the cultivator's information and the first set of spirit stones were given. This was jointly organized by the 4 major forces of Penglai Island. The purpose was to let the new cultivators better adapt to the environment of Penglai Island and at the same time leave behind some good fortune. In this way, all the new cultivators had received help from the 4 major forces. At least, they would feel grateful to the 4 major forces. Therefore, in Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen's imagination, this place should be very bright and spacious. However, it seemed to be just an ordinary place now. The most important thing was that there was only one old man inside. At this moment, his eyes were half closed as if he had fallen asleep. Bailey Hongzhuang slowly walked in front of the old man and called softly, "Senior?" Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, the old man who seemed to have fallen asleep slowly opened his eyes. He looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen indifferently and said casually, "Newcomers?" Bailey Hongzhuang nodded, "Yes." The old man slowly took out the banknotes from the drawer and looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen. "Name?" Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen looked at each other. Just when they were about to say their names, the old man's voice sounded again. Don't think too much. Just say your real name. The news here will not be known by anyone outside. Even the people from the 4 major forces won't know. As soon as he said that, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen couldn't help but be stunned. Their eyes flashed with deep surprise. If it was said that outsiders did not know about this situation, they would believe it. However, this place was originally built by the 4 great forces, so how could they not know about this news? The old man's words were simply too outrageous. However, the old man clearly did not intend to continue explaining. He merely swept his turbid gaze across Bailey Hongzhuang and Lin Mingyao, as if saying that it was up to them whether they believed him or not. Bailey Hongzhuang sized up the old man in front of him. After thinking for a moment, he said, Bailey Hongzhuang. Di Beichen. Hearing this, the old man's hand that was recording Bailey Hongzhuang's name paused. He looked up at Di Beichen and asked, Your surname is Di? That's right. Di Beichen nodded. Is there a problem? The old man carefully sized up Di Beichen. A trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. He then shook his head and said, Nothing. Seeing this, although Di Beichen felt that it was a little strange, he did not continue kissing. It was obvious that the old man did not intend to say anything. It was probably because his surname was a little strange. After recording the names, the old man took out 2 Qiankuan bags from the drawer and placed them on the table. 100 spiritual stones for each person. Take this manual and you may leave. As soon as he finished speaking, the old man closed his eyes again. Nothing changed, just like before Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen arrived. Chapter 2959. Even though the other party had a lazy look on his face the entire time, since they had taken something useful from this place, they naturally needed to thank him. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen felt that the old man's words were too strange. They could faintly sense that this seemingly lethargic old man was not an ordinary person. This was because when he had mentioned the 4 great authorities, there was no trace of reverence on his face. On the contrary, there was a sense of indifference. The hidden meaning behind this was rather complicated. However, just as Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen were about to turn around and leave, the old man opened his eyes once again. Young people, since you've arrived on Penglai Island, it would be best for you to head to the demon abyss as soon as possible. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen paused in their footstep. Their hearts were filled with astonishment as they could not understand why the old man would suddenly say such a thing. However, the old man's next words caused their hearts to jump out of their chests. In this place, the demon abyss is the most convenient place to hide one's identity. If you want to hide your identity elsewhere, it won't be that easy. The old man's voice was low and hoarse. His voice was not very loud, but it sounded like he was talking in his sleep. However, his words hammered heavily into Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen's hearts. Almost as soon as they heard these words, their hearts churned with perilous waves. They've been seen through. This old man must have seen through their identities. Otherwise, he would never have said such a thing. However, ever since they had entered this place, they had not shown any signs of abnormality. However, they had been seen through just like that. This was just too terrifying. At this moment, they were certain that this old man was not in his twilight years. On the contrary, it was very likely that he was an old demon. That they had been seen through just like that had completely exceeded Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen's expectations. They were even more worried that this old man might be related to the members of the Heaven Shaking Association. Otherwise, they would be in real trouble. I'm already a pile of old bones, you don't have to take it to heart. I'm just giving you a reminder on account of your manners. Let's go. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen turned around and saw that the old man had once again laid down on the reclining chair. He had no intention of speaking at all. The two of them felt a wave of apprehension, but they knew that everything the old man had said was true. If this old man really wanted to harm them, he would have already acted. Demon Refining Abyss. This was also the place where Bailey Hongzhuang and the others planned to go, but now they only knew that Demon Refining Abyss was on Demon Refining Island, and it was still a long way from Emerald Island. However, if it was convenient for them to hide their identities there, then it was indeed a good place for them to go. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen walked out of the house, trembling with fear. It wasn't until they stood under the sun again that they breathed a sigh of relief. Let's go back first. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Di Beichen. After the old man's words, their feelings were a little complicated. Most importantly, the old man's words made them realize that the situation here was not safe. Di Beichen looked around. The members of the Heaven Shaking Association were very likely to be nearby. It was just that he did not know when they would appear. Chapter 2960. Not long after Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen walked forward, two figures suddenly appeared in front of Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen. Both of them were about 35 years old, and their rough faces revealed a valiant aura. The moment they saw these two people, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen had already guessed that these two guys must be the people sent by the Jintian faction to find them. What are your names? The two men looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen. Their tone was cold, and their attitude was not polite at all. It was as if they did not put Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen in their eyes. They were just newcomers. In fact, every newcomer was easy to bully, so the two men did not take them seriously at all. Di Beichen frowned at the two men and said, "Who are you? Why are you blocking our way?" "We are people from the Jintian faction. We were ordered by the faction leader to find a few newcomers here to confirm your identity. Tell me your names." "Di Chen. Di Bei." At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang was dressed as a man, and her identity was Di Beichen's younger brother, so she simply used the first two words of Di Beichen's name. When she was receiving the spirit stones before, because the old man said that it would not be leaked, Bailey Hongzhuang said her real name. It was not a rare thing for a woman to dress up as a man on Penglai Island. But beautiful women often choose to dress up as men in order to avoid some harassment. Of course, when you have enough strength to protect yourself, there is no need to continue to disguise. Hearing this, the two men nodded and did not take Di Beichen and Di Beichen's name to heart. "When did you come to Emerald Island?" "Yesterday." "When you came from the outside, did you see a team of 4 people?" the man asked immediately. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen shook their heads together and said, "No." Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen's movements were so consistent, the two men also believed a little. If one nodded and the other shook his head, then the problem would be big. "The faction leader asked us to find 4 people, there are only 2 of them, it should not be them," the slightly fat man said slowly, his attention no longer on Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen. Bailey Hongzhuang quietly breathed a sigh of relief. As long as they could avoid this layer of investigation, they could rest. They could rest assured. However, the skinny man shook his head and reprimanded the chubby man. "Are you stupid? If you know that there are people's people, you will come out with 4 people." The gang leader had said that anyone who came in recently was a suspect and had to be carefully investigated. If they missed the opportunity, they would be severely punished. What's more, do you want the reward? After the thin man's reminder, the fat man's eyes lit up and said, "You are right, if these 2 people are really them, then we will be rich." "Can we go?" Bailey Hongzhuang asked. She had a faint premonition that if they continued to stay here, the situation would become more and more troublesome. "Eat these 2 true chi pills, then answer our questions again." The thin man opened his right hand. There were 2 perfectly round pills in his palm. When she heard the words true chi pill, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes suddenly changed and her heart thumped. She did not expect that Penglai Island would have true chi pills. Chapter 2961. Zhenqi pill, as the name suggests, is related to sincerity. As long as you take the Zhenqi pill, no matter what the other party asks you, you can only tell the truth. You can't tell any lies at all. Although the level of this Jinchi pill is not high, it has a great effect, so it was widely used thousands of years ago. Bailey Hongzhuang has never heard of anyone using Jinchi pill since she transmigrated. She only thought that this Jinchi pill has been lost. She didn't expect to see Jinchi pill again in this Penglai island. It was really beyond her expectation. If they took the Jinchi pill, it was tantamount to completely exposing their identity. If she was prepared, she could have a way to deal with it, but she didn't think that Jinchi pill would appear at all. Naturally, she had no way to deal with it at this moment. What is Jinchi pill? I don't want to eat it. Bailey Hongzhuang frowned, and a look of refusal appeared on her face. However, this behavior did not make the two people feel strange. In fact, not only Bailey Hongzhuang, but anyone who was suddenly forced to eat the pill would not be willing. Eating the Jinchi pill is not bad for you. It is just to test whether what you said just now is true or not, the lean man said. Although Di Beichen didn't know what the use of this Jinchi pill was, he knew that this Jinchi pill was definitely not something good when he noticed Bailey Hongzhuang's expression. You just take out something and you want us to eat it. Even if we are new here and don't know enough about many things, you are bullying us too much. Di Beichen's face was filled with a sullen expression. He was about to resist because the other party's actions had crossed his bottom line. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen were about to resist, the lean man and the chubby man couldn't help but look at each other with a complicated expression. In fact, they also knew that this approach was indeed a bit difficult, but Jinchi pill really had no harm. I can assure you that this true Qi pill does not have any harm. You may not know this in the outside world, but in our Penglai Island, this is a method that is often used. The slightly plump man explained. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen's faces were always full of rejection, and they were not willing to listen to their explanations. Bailey Hongzhuang was also secretly anxious. It seemed that they had underestimated the importance of Gao Hanxia and Gao Hanxiu to Gao Hanxiu. In order to capture the four of them, Gao Hanchun didn't even hesitate to use true Qi pills on a large scale. Just from this point alone, one could see many things. Based on their performance, it was likely that they would not be allowed to leave unless they consumed the true Qi pill. In this way, the other party would definitely suspect them even more, and their identities would naturally be exposed. Speaking of which, this was truly a troublesome matter. If you want to eat, you can eat by yourselves. We won't eat, Bailey Hongzhuang said coldly. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's stubbornness, the lean man's face also showed a trace of impatience, and his low voice also became a bit more threatening. I am not asking for your opinion now. If I ask you to eat, you have to eat. Otherwise, you will be making an enemy of our entire heaven-shaking faction. You have to think carefully. What heaven-shaking faction? We have never heard of it. Di Beichen said coldly. You two guys who don't know anything naturally haven't heard of it. Chapter 2962. The commotion caused by Bailey Hongzhuang's group of four had attracted the attention of many people. Almost everyone recognized that the two were from the Shocking Heaven faction. It's the Shocking Heaven faction again. Recently, the Shocking Heaven faction's movements have been too big. It makes people feel very uncomfortable. The current strength of the Heaven-Shaking faction is indeed very powerful, but the Heaven-Shaking faction is not the only faction on the Penglai Island. Right now they are acting so arrogantly, as if they are the only faction. That's because the two brothers of the Shocking Heaven faction were killed. Gao Hanchun is now angry from embarrassment. If he doesn't find the murderer, he will have no place to hide his face. These two newcomers are really unlucky. However, recently, as long as they are new cultivators, they will all be found by the Shocking Heaven faction. Everyone, just treat it as a joke. Previously, I saw two newcomers on other islands who refused to be interrogated by the Shocking Heaven faction. As a result, they were directly killed. TSK. Everyone discussed while watching the show. For them, this matter had nothing to do with them. Anyway, it was very interesting to watch a show. Bailey Hongzhuang's group of 4 and the lean man's group of 4 were still confronting each other. The atmosphere was getting more and more tense. Beichen, once you take this true Qi Dan, you will definitely be telling the truth. Even we can't control it. So, you must not take it. Bailey Hongzhuang transmitted to Di Beichen. They must think of a countermeasure. Hearing this, Di Beichen also understood. He also felt very helpless about the existence of the true Qi Dan. Although there are only these 2 guys here, I reckon that there are definitely more than these 2 people in the Shocking Heaven faction on Emerald Island. We can't fight recklessly. Once our strength is exposed, it will be more troublesome. We can only run. Di Beichen said in a deep voice. That's the only way now. Later, we will pretend to take the medicine and then take the opportunity to escape. With the speed of the 2 of us, we should be able to shake them off. As long as we find a secluded corner, we can enter the chaos ring and disguise ourselves before coming out. It won't be easy for them to recognize us, Bailey Hongzhuang said. The 2 of them confirmed the answer with a single glance. Fortunately, they had the existence of a heaven-defying divine tool like the Chaos Ring. Using it to avoid being tracked was practically the best method. I say, do you 2 understand? If you don't eat it, we'll have to put in some effort to make you swallow it. The lean man's voice was full of threat, and his expression was a little more ferocious. With so many people paying attention to them, if they continued to delay like this, it would only weaken their heaven-shaking faction's face. As he spoke, the lean man's 6th-level purple realm aura erupted. Obviously, as long as Bailey Hongzhuang and Gu Ruoyun did not listen to him, he would immediately take action. At most, you 2 have just reached the 5th level of the purple realm. You better think carefully. If you let the 2 of us do it, I'm afraid it won't be as simple as eating a pill. If you lose an arm or a leg, or even lose your life, don't regret it. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen's faces flashed with a trace of fear, as if they were threatened by the 2's strength and words, and their expressions became hesitant. Chapter 2963. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang was panicking, the 2 men from the Heaven-Shaking faction showed a satisfied look. They were members of the Heaven-Shaking faction. If they couldn't even deal with 2 newcomers, wouldn't they lose a lot of face? At this moment, the 2 men didn't think that Bailey Hongzhuang might be the culprits they wanted to catch. They only thought about how to protect their face. On this Penglai Island there were many people with strength. But when they reached this level, what they valued the most was their face. They didn't care about other things, but they had to care about their face. Di Beichen's face also showed a complicated expression, mixed with hesitation and fear. Obviously, he couldn't make up his mind. You really didn't lie to us? Is it really okay to eat this pill? You didn't deliberately lie to us and then use this method to control us, right? I heard that some forces just can't recruit people, so they use this kind of despicable method to make others have no chance to refuse. You can't be such people, right? Di Beichen looked at the 2 men from the Heaven-Shaking faction suspiciously, his eyes full of fear. As soon as these words came out, many cultivators in the surrounding tea-houses frowned. They had never thought about this before. Now that they heard Di Beichen's reminder, they also came back to their senses. Could this man's guess be true? The Heaven-Shaking faction wasn't that powerful before, but in the past 2 years, they have recruited more and more people, and their influence is getting bigger and bigger. The so-called brother's death couldn't be a gimmick deliberately made up by Gao Hanchun, and in fact, he wants to use this method to recruit people, right? If that's the case, then this is really a perfect plan. It's simply keeping everyone in the dark. The 2 men from the Heaven-Shaking faction couldn't help but be dumbfounded after hearing Di Beichen's words. Even they didn't think of this possibility, okay? The most terrible thing was that, after Di Beichen said so, they connected all the things together and felt that it was very reasonable. Feeling the gradually changing gazes of the people around them, The two men were almost anxious to death. What the hell was this? The pill in their hands was indeed a true chi pill, and not any other pill at all. You stinking brat, are you tired of living? What nonsense are you talking about? The lean man cursed. He noticed that some people were gradually approaching, wanting to know what was going on. Although he was very sure that this was a true chi pill, he didn't know why he was being watched by so many people. Hurry up and eat it for me. Otherwise, we'll take action, the chubby man threatened. Something was wrong with the surrounding situation. Although the heaven-shaking faction was powerful, their headquarters was not on the Emerald Island. If the native forces of the Emerald Island were to suspect them, then the two of them would not have a good ending. Therefore, their only way was to let Di Beichen eat the Jinchi Dan. In this way, all the problems would naturally be solved. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen's faces showed a touch of helplessness, and said, "Let's eat it." The two of them slowly took the true chi pill from the lean man's hand and prepared to eat it. Chapter 2964. They believed that as long as Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen took the pills, all the misunderstandings would be resolved. However, just as the two men relaxed, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen turned around and ran away. The two of them instantly increased their speed to the extreme. They had said so much just to numb the two men from the heaven-shaking faction and let them know that they didn't dare to resist. Therefore, they wouldn't keep an eye on them. Di Beichen's words attracted the attention of everyone present, and at the same time, it also diverted the attention of the two men from the heaven-shaking faction. As a result, the moment they picked up the pills was the best opportunity to escape. In the blink of an eye, the two men from the heaven-shaking faction had just heaved a sigh of relief. Before they could react, they saw Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen running away in front of them. They ran away, the two men were stunned for a moment, then they quickly chased after them. "You two stinking brats, don't run!" However, just as the two men from the heaven-shaking faction were about to chase after them, some of the cultivators around them intentionally blocked their path. The heaven-shaking faction's recent behavior was a little too arrogant, so some people didn't mind causing some trouble for them. Although it was only a short delay, by the time the two men caught up, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen had already disappeared in some corner. "Damn it! I didn't think that those two brats would dare to run away." The skinny man secretly cursed, and directly punched the wall. His skinny face was full of shame and anger. He never thought that those two cowardly fellows would have the possibility of running away. Being tricked by those two brats in front of so many people, it would be a great loss of face if word got out. If I had known earlier, I would have used force to force those two guys to eat it. Deng Liang, why do I feel that today's situation is a little bad? The chubby man frowned. He already had an ominous premonition. Deng Liang's face also became very ugly. "I'm afraid we're in trouble. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have let those two guys eat the truth pill." Those two fellows ran away just like that. Could they really be the murderers we're looking for? Kong Wei, the slightly plump man, couldn't help but ask. The two of them looked at each other. In fact, even until now, the two of them had no idea what was going on. They couldn't be sure whether the two newcomers were afraid of being poisoned or because they were the culprit. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen ran to a secluded corner before entering the chaos ring. They would only come out when it was safe. "Master, the heaven-shaking faction's method of capturing people is really not simple. If we encounter something like this again in the future, I'm afraid it will be very troublesome." Xiao He jumped in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. Her furry head was full of helplessness. The scene just now was really thrilling. If they didn't seize the opportunity to escape, once they were caught, it would be really troublesome. Chapter 2965. Is the effect of the true nature pill really that miraculous? Di Beichen's handsome eyes flashed with disbelief. He had never heard of the existence of the true nature pill before. Today, when he heard of it for the first time, it really surprised him. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. This true nature pill is indeed very miraculous. 1,000 years ago, it was also a method that people often used to interrogate people. I have never seen anyone use the true nature pill before. I thought it had been lost in the Shengxian continent. I didn't expect to see it again in Penglai Island. It really caught us off guard. Is this pill the same as the one you used 1,000 years ago? Di Beichen handed the true nature pill in his hand to Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at the true nature pill in her hand, sniffed it, and nodded. Yes, it's the same. In that case, many of the pills are not lost. They are just in the hands of Penglai Island. Di Beichen's eyes were deep. Today was only their second day in Penglai Island. The things they came in contact with made people sigh. It seems that I have to make more preparations. I'm afraid there are many methods here that can't be compared to the outside world. A sharp light flashed through Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes. In terms of methods, she also had many. She would remember today's matter. The heaven-shaking faction put them in danger. When they have the chance, they will definitely let the heaven-shaking faction have a taste of their own medicine. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen changed their appearance again. Their appearance was no longer the same as before. Presumably, it would be difficult for the other party to discover them after they go out. After what happened just now, the people of the heaven-shaking faction will probably suspect that the two of you are the murderers. Once the two of them spread the news, I'm afraid there will be many more people of the heaven-shaking faction on Emerald Island. It will be even more difficult to leave this place. Baisher frowned. His eyes flashed with deep worry. There's no other way now. We can only take one step at a time. Bailey Hongzhuang shrugged her shoulders. The current development of the situation was beyond their expectations. They thought that it wouldn't be difficult to muddle through today, but they didn't expect that things would become so big. It was really troublesome. We have to meet up with Ziren and inform them of this news, so that they can be prepared. Fortunately, only the two of us have been exposed. As long as they disguise themselves a bit more and don't get suspected by the heaven-shaking faction, everything will be fine. Di Beichen said in a deep voice. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. We've been here for a while, so I'm afraid the outside world is already in an uproar. The heaven-shaking faction's people will soon find the inn we're staying in, and Ziren's group will be caught off guard. Let's go back and take a look. After making their decision, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen exited the Chaos Ring and reappeared on the Emerald Island. The two of them walked all the way to the inn. When they entered the inn, they found that the heaven-shaking faction didn't immediately find them. It was much better than they expected. However, when they passed by the lobby, almost everyone was talking about what happened just now. Have you heard about what happened to the heaven-shaking faction? I heard. It is said that everyone suspects that the heaven-shaking faction's truth pill is fake. Their purpose is to use this method to recruit people. Chapter 2966. Inside the room. When Ziren and Shangguan Yingying were anxiously pacing back and forth. When Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen went to the square in the morning, the two of them were very worried. However, because there was a certain risk, Di Beichen and Shangguan Yingying told them to stay in the restaurant at ease. After all, it was better for the two of them to be watched than to be watched by 4 people. However, after waiting for a long time, they did not see Di Beichen and Shangguan Yingying return. When they could not help but go out to inquire about the news, they heard the discussions of the people in the inn. They asked the waiter and found out what had happened. Beichen and Shangguan Yingying ran away. I wonder if they will be caught? Shangguan Yingying's face was full of worry. They did not expect the heaven-shaking faction to be so powerful. Most importantly, although the Emerald Island was not big, it was not small either. So many people in the square had seen Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen. Even if they had temporarily escaped the heaven-shaking faction's pursuit, where could they hide? Once they were discovered, they would be in big trouble. When Ziren's brows were also full of worry. I believe that with Beichen and Shangguan Yingying's ability, they will definitely find a way to escape. However, when he said this, Ziren did not have enough confidence. The main reason was that the people here were more powerful than the other. If someone really wanted to catch Di Baichen and Shangguan Yingying, it would not be easy to escape. If Baichen and Shangguan Yingying are really caught, with Gao Hanxuan's character, I'm afraid Shangguan Yingying's brows wrinkled. She did not dare to think about the consequences. Let's pay more attention to the news. At least we haven't heard any news of Baichen and Shangguan Yingying being caught. This is the best news. Just as Ziren and Shangguan Yingying were talking, suddenly, there was a knock on the door. When Ziren immediately became vigilant. At this time, someone suddenly knocked on the door. Could it be that the heaven-shaking faction had come to the inn to search? The two of them slowly opened the door, only to see two strangers standing outside. However, in the next second, Ziren had already reacted. "It's you guys?" Di Baichen and Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and nodded. It was not easy for Ziren to recognize them. Shangguan Yingying was a little puzzled at first, but after seeing Bailey Hongzhuang's smile, she understood. "Fortunately, you weren't caught. We were so worried. How could the two of us be caught so easily? However, we really can't stay on Emerald Island for long. After today's incident, the Zhentian faction will definitely focus their investigation on the Emerald Island. It's really troublesome," Di Baichen said in a deep voice. "I've already heard some news in the inn." Ziren nodded. "I'm afraid it won't be easy for us to leave now. Anyone who intends to leave today will be suspected. The docks might already be watched. The moment we show ourselves, it's very likely that we'll be caught. Then what should we do now?" Shangguan Yingying was annoyed. Gao Hanxia and Shangguan Yingying really deserve to die. They caused us such a big trouble. However, we've just arrived on Emerald Island and we're already being chased everywhere. I don't know when this situation will be resolved. Chapter 2967. Since the Emerald Island had become like this, the situation on the other islands would not be much better than the Emerald Island. Even if they wanted to pretend that they were not newcomers, they still knew too little about the Penglai Island. As long as the other party asked a few more questions, it was very likely that they would be exposed, which was undoubtedly extremely terrible. If going to any place was the same, then what was the difference between staying on the Emerald Island and going to the Emerald Island? Hearing Ziren's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and Shangguan Yingying fell into silence, but in their minds, they could not help but think of the words that the old man had said to them before. If they wanted to hide their identity, the easiest place was the demonic abyss. Demonic abyss. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen said in unison. Seeing Di Baichen and Bailey Hongzhuang say the same place at the same time, Ziren and Shangguan Yingying were also surprised. "What do you mean? If we leave the Emerald Island, let's go to the demonic abyss first. That should be the most suitable place for us to hide our identity, and there we can improve our strength better there, and there should be a great chance to earn spirit stones." Di Baichen's voice was low, and his deep black eyes were filled with wisdom and farsightedness. He had never been to the demonic abyss, but he was very familiar with the Bloodland abyss. If his judgment was correct, the demonic abyss and the Bloodland abyss should be the same type of existence, but the demonic abyss had a higher requirement for cultivation. The cultivators on the Penglai Island had all met the requirements to enter the demonic abyss, so the demonic abyss must be an extremely lively place. In such a place filled with slaughter and blood, no one would care about who you were. Even if the heaven-shaking faction's influence was not small, once they went to the demonic abyss, they would definitely not be able to use their power. Because no one would care about them. The demonic abyss was a place that relied on strength, not numbers. There were plenty of people who took the other party's life because of a disagreement. It was impossible for the heaven-shaking faction to rely on the power of their faction to intimidate others in the demonic refining abyss. Ziren pondered for a moment before his eyes lit up. "You're right. The demonic refining abyss should be the same as the bloody ground abyss. It's an unreasonable place. No force can play a relative role in that place. You two are quite smart. Why didn't I think of that? However, with our strength, we still have to be careful when we go to the demonic abyss. The average strength of the cultivators there is probably stronger than that of the Emerald Island. Bailey Hongzhuang's voice was slightly heavy. She was not extremely happy because she had found a place to go, because going to the demonic abyss might be even more dangerous than the environment they were currently in. Thinking back, when we went to the bloody ground abyss, we were also inexperienced. The people there were all on their own. As long as we are careful, there won't be a problem. At least it's much better than hiding like a rat on the Emerald Island. Xiren said with a faint smile. In that case, let's go to the demonic refining abyss after leaving the Emerald Island. Right now, we have to think of a way to leave this place. Hongzhuang, Beichen's physique shouldn't be a problem, right? With our current situation, I'm afraid we won't be able to go to the auction for the time being. Chapter 2968. Hearing Shangguan Yingying's words, Bailey Hongzhuang's pretty face showed a touch of helplessness. What she was most worried about was the change in Di Beichen's physique. If they could find those two herbs, Di Beichen's cursed physique would turn into a physique of heaven's will, then his cultivation speed would greatly increase. On the contrary, as long as his physique didn't change, Di Beichen's cultivation speed would definitely be much slower than ordinary people. Unfortunately, a big problem like Gao Hanchun had appeared, so their original plan could only be ruined. Don't worry, my body won't have any problems for the time being. The most important thing now is to solve this big problem in front of us. Although Gao Hanchun won't give up until he finds us, if he can't find us, I believe he won't be able to hold on for too long. After all, even if he's the faction master of the heaven-shaking faction, he can't make everyone give up their own interests to help him find people. In the long run, complaints will be inevitable. Di Beichen's face was filled with a comforting smile, and his heart was filled with warmth. He knew very well how much Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two cared about him. Beichen's body won't have any problems in the next 1 or 2 years, but to be on the safe side, we can't delay for too long. We don't know if the Golden Flame auction house still has those two herbs, and if they do, we need to consider what we need to pay them. All these preparations will take time. Bailey Hongzhuang's clear voice was somewhat heavy. To her, nothing was more important than Di Beichen's safety. If something happened to Beichen because of Gao Hanchun, she would definitely bury the entire heaven-shaking faction. Xiren nodded. No matter what, finding the herbs is the most important thing. Once we get to the demonic refining island and get rid of the heaven-shaking faction's pursuit, we'll have to think of a way. That damned Gao Hanchun, those 3 brothers are really annoying. Shangguan Yingying cursed. After confirming their next plan, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 stayed in the house, and were not in a hurry to leave. If they did not find out everything, it would be too risky for them to leave rashly. Not long after, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3 received the news that the pier was under the control of the heaven-shaking faction. Anyone who wanted to leave would be investigated by heaven-shaking faction. Heaven-shaking faction's people were almost certain that Bailey Hongzhuang duo who escaped today were the culprits. I'll go downstairs to order some food and wine and get some information, when Xiren said. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 nodded. Right now, the news was very important to them. Being trapped on Emerald Island was always very dangerous. Compared to the depressed mood of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 3, Kong Wei and the other heaven-shaking faction members were not in a good mood either. It's really strange. The entire Emerald Island is only so big. We've been looking for them for so long, but we still haven't found them. Where did they hide? I've already asked the people around. It seems that after they escaped this morning, no one has seen them again. This is really strange. Could it be that someone deliberately helped them hide? Deng Liang frowned. They had caused such a big commotion today. If they could not hand the two over, they would be the unlucky ones. Chapter 2969. Kong Wei sighed, as if he wanted to accept the consequences of his crime. He couldn't help but shiver. He really didn't want to experience that kind of consequence. When Ziren returned to the room, a smile actually appeared on his face. Beichen, the two of you are really amazing today. Ziren gave Di Beichen a thumbs up with a hint of schadenfreude. Looking at Ziren's expression, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen looked at each other. The two of them were somewhat puzzled, not understanding what Ziren meant. What news did you hear? It doesn't seem to be bad news. Di Beichen asked. Ziren smiled faintly. Actually, this is not good news for us, because our situation is still as dangerous. However, this is bad news for the heaven-shaking faction, so I think it is good news. What do you mean after talking for so long? Don't keep us in suspense, quickly tell us. Shangguan Yingying couldn't hold back her impatience, and quickly said. Didn't you refuse to take the true nature pill today? Di Beichen nodded. That's right, what's the problem with that? That's a big problem. Not only did you not take the true nature pill, but you also took it and ran away. Now, many people suspect that the reason why the heaven-shaking faction was able to grow so strong in such a short period of time is because they used control methods on many people, forcing them to take the pill to recruit more people. Many people have already believed that the news of Gao Hanchuan's two younger brothers being killed was just a rumor he deliberately spread, and it was not the truth at all. It was just a pretense to deceive everyone. If the pill is still in the hands of the heaven-shaking faction, they can still prove it, but the two of you took the pill and ran away, which means that the dead cannot testify. No matter how the heaven-shaking faction tries to explain, everyone will still be suspicious. It is said that the local forces of the Emerald Island are very dissatisfied with the Heaven-Shaking Association because of this matter. The Heaven-Shaking Association is determined to find the two of you and prove their innocence. Listening to Ziren's words, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but be surprised. She also felt that Di Beichen's previous statement to arouse everyone's suspicion was extremely wise, but she didn't expect the matter to ferment so quickly, and the impact was also beyond her expectations. In that case, if the heaven-shaking faction doesn't find you, wouldn't it be very difficult for them? Shangguan Yingying's lips curled into a smile. The heaven-shaking faction had caused them so much trouble, and now she had also gotten into trouble. She was really happy to see this. When Ziren nodded, all the heaven-shaking faction members from the nearby islands have rushed to the Emerald Island, saying that they must find the two of you. Moreover, I heard that Gao Hanchun will be coming to Emerald Island personally tomorrow. In short, there will be a good show to watch. In that case, we can't let them find us. It's best to turn this suspicion into irrefutable evidence. Bailey Hongzhuang's phoenix eyes narrowed. Gao Hanchun had forced them into such a situation. Although she didn't have the strength to fight against the Heaven-Shaking Association, it was still very good to use some small tricks to create some trouble. It seems. Hongzhuang seems to have an idea? Shangguan Yingying laughed. Chapter 2970. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's appearance, Shangguan Yingying and the other two smiled. In terms of means, they couldn't compare with Bailey Hongzhuang. Although in terms of cultivation and number of people, they were no match for the heaven-shaking faction, but in terms of means, this was not necessarily the case. Anyway, we can't leave even if we want to now. The dock has been closely guarded. Now, anyone who wants to leave will be targeted. We might as well just stay here. Ziren shrugged his shoulders. The heaven-shaking faction's people obviously wouldn't give up until they caught Di Beichen and Shangguan Yingying. At this moment, the people who wanted to leave were the first to bear the brunt. Since they couldn't leave, they might as well not leave in a hurry. The heaven-shaking faction's movement is so big, and it's such a forceful action, it will inevitably cause a lot of dissatisfaction. This is not a good thing for them. Di Beichen slowly sipped his tea, a faint smile on his picturesque face. In order to find the four of them, Gao Hanchun would have to pay a great price in the future. Now it seemed that the heaven-shaking faction was very awe-inspiring, but once the other forces showed their dissatisfaction, the other forces would certainly take this opportunity to show their dissatisfaction. In this regard, Gao Hanchun had made the wrong decision from the beginning. Unless their strength had reached the level of the four major forces, their actions were not far from causing public anger. Naturally, Di Baichen had added fuel to the fire. Of course, this was also related to Gao Hanchun underestimating the four of them. If ordinary cultivators didn't have the ability to disguise themselves, it would be very easy for them to be caught by the heaven-shaking faction. However, Bailey Hongzhuang's disguise technique was not comparable to ordinary people. Even if their cultivation had reached the Purple Realm, it would still be difficult for them to judge their disguise, unless the opponent's cultivation was much higher than theirs. For example, the old man they saw today. Although they didn't know what kind of cultivation the old man had reached, Di Baichen was sure that the old man was very strong. He had seen through their disguise almost at a glance. In front of such an expert, all disguises were useless. Fortunately, the old man did not have any ill intentions towards them. Otherwise, they would have really gotten into big trouble. Bailey Hongzhuang took out the alchemy furnace and began to refine the Dan. The level of the true spirit Dan was not high, but it had a wide range of uses. In his previous life, Bailey Hongzhuang would often keep a few true qi pills on her body so that she could use them when necessary. Back then, she thought that this true nature pill was a great way to obtain true information. However, if this pill backfired on them, it wouldn't be a good thing. Therefore, at that time, she specially researched how to crack the effects of this true nature pill. In the end, she managed to figure it out. However, only the members of the Bailey family knew about this. The others probably couldn't do anything about the Jinqi pill. What she needed to make now was the pill to break the true heart pill. This was not a real pill, but a fusion of some special materials to produce the effect of resisting the true heart pill. With this pill, he would be able to save a lot of trouble when traveling around Penglai Island. Chapter 2971. While Bailey Hongzhuang was fully focused on her preparations, Di Baichen and the other two were very quiet. They didn't want to disturb Bailey Hongzhuang because of their actions. They would occasionally look downstairs and pay attention to the movements of the Jintian faction. After Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen were discovered in the morning, the people of the Jintian faction had already found this inn. They searched the room that Bailey Hongzhuang and Kong Wei had stayed in and asked a lot of information about them. The innkeeper and the waiter answered truthfully, especially the waiter who was completely dumbfounded when he found out that Bailey Hongzhuang and Kong Wei were the murderers of Gao Hanchun and Kong Wei. Yesterday, he was still vividly telling Bailey Hongzhuang and Kong Wei about this gossip. He didn't expect that the real murderers would appear in front of him. Now he was really panicking. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and Kong Wei didn't leave any useful information, so the people of the Jintian faction couldn't find anything. Di Baichen and the others were very clear about this. In fact, the people of the Jintian faction couldn't confirm whether the two of them were the real murderers or not. They just wanted to calm the public opinion and eliminate everyone's suspicions. Therefore, they forcefully put the blame on Bailey Hongzhuang and Kong Wei. Of course, there were many discerning people on the Emerald Island who were very clear about this. Night slowly fell, but the Emerald Island was getting more and more lively. Everyone's discussion about the Jintian faction was getting louder and louder. This was because in this short day, many people of the Jintian faction had arrived. The number of people surprised many people. Deng Liang and Kong Wei searched for an entire day but couldn't find any trace of Bailey Hongzhuang and Kong Wei. Their faces were getting uglier and uglier. You still can't find any trace of the two of them? Lu Jiangong's face was gloomy, and his voice was filled with deep dissatisfaction. Hearing Lu Jiangong's words, Deng Liang and Kong Wei couldn't help but tremble. Cold sweat poured down their bodies, and their hearts were filled with nervousness and fear. "Second Master, we've tried our best to find them, but those two fellows seem to have disappeared into thin air. No matter how hard we searched, we couldn't find any trace of them." Deng Liang's voice became softer and softer as he spoke. His narrow and bright eyes looked at Lu Jiangang from time to time, observing his reaction. "Do you know how much your actions have affected our Zhentian faction?" Lu Jiangang's dignified face was filled with anger. His dignified face was full of anger. Deng Liang and Kong Wei, he and Kong Wei quickly kneeled on the ground and said, "Second Master, we didn't expect that those two fellows actually running to escape. No, and no one was more than the two were Beichen and Kong, and something like this had happened inexplicably. They didn't understand what had happened at all, but they had already gotten themselves into so much trouble that they couldn't get rid of it. Normally, with their status, it was impossible for them to meet the Second Master. They didn't expect to meet the Second Master under such circumstances. If the Second Master got angry, they could lose their lives at any time." Chapter 2972. The teacup fell beside Deng Liang and Kong Wei. The tea splashed all over the floor, and the teacup was shattered into pieces. Lu Jiangang's eyes seemed to be able to spit fire, as if he couldn't wait to tear Deng Liang and Kong Wei into pieces. Deng Liang and Kong Wei couldn't help but tremble. The two of them were just small fries in the Zhentian faction. If the second faction master wanted to kill them, it would only take a blink of an eye. "Second faction master, we really don't know how things turned out like this. Please be magnanimous and spare us this time." Kong Wei kept kowtowing. His head soon broke and blood flowed out, but he didn't seem to feel the pain. He just kept begging for mercy. "Now many forces have begun to suspect that we are using such despicable means to recruit members. Such a big pot of dirty water has been poured on our Zhentian faction's head, and we can't wash it clean. And all of this is because of your negligence today. Can you two afford to pay this price?" Lu Jiangang's anger still hadn't subsided. Recently, it was already very troublesome to help the faction master find those four daring fellows. He never thought that such a big thing would happen today. When he heard the news, he couldn't help but be dumbfounded. After 2 years of continuous efforts, the Zhentian faction's strength was getting stronger and stronger, and the number of members was also increasing. In the end, there was a rumor that they were using such despicable means to recruit members. None of the members really wanted to join them, but they were controlled and had no choice but to join. This made him spit out a mouthful of old blood. The first thing he wanted to do was to draw his sword and kill the guy who spread the rumor. But in the end, the result of the investigation was that it was their faction's members who made the rumor. Moreover, after hearing the whole story, he was speechless to the extreme. And the other people's suspicions seemed to be well-founded? He knew very well that the most important thing now was to catch those two fellows. Only by catching the source could they completely explain this misunderstanding. However, they had so many members and almost surrounded the entire Emerald Island, but they still couldn't find any trace of those two fellows. This was too ironic. Although the Zhentian faction looked very impressive with so many members gathered on the Emerald Island, in fact, everyone was waiting to see them make a fool of themselves. If they couldn't find those two fellows, then their Zhentian faction's image and prestige would be greatly reduced. When he thought of this, he wanted to directly send those two fellows to heaven. Unfortunately, only these two fellows knew the image of those two, so he couldn't kill them for the time being. "Second faction master, we really didn't expect that kid to say such words." Deng Liang was about to cry. What was going on? He couldn't say that he couldn't explain himself. If he didn't take it out, then there's wouldn't it? If he didn't take it. If two. Lu Jiangang's face was cold. "I just received news that the sect leader will be coming to Emerald Island tomorrow. You should know how clear this matter is in your hearts." Chapter 2973. With a wave of Lu Jiangang's hand, Deng Liang and Kong Wei scrambled out of the inn. When they heard that the sect master had come in person, their faces were already ashen. Even the sect master had to come in person for this matter. It could be seen that the influence had completely exceeded their imagination. The two immediately rushed out as if they had gone mad. Whether they could save their lives depended on whether they could catch those two guys before the sect master arrived, otherwise, only death would await them. Compared to Deng Liang and Kong Wei's gloominess, the situation of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others was much calmer. As the saying goes, the most dangerous place is the safest place. This inn was the first inn that the Zhentian faction searched. Instead of going to other inns, it was better to continue staying here. The other inns were also facing the same situation, but the biggest problem was the residence of Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen. Naturally, the two of them couldn't go back to their rooms. If they went to other inns at this time, it would be easy to be suspected by others. Now, they could only stay in Ziren's room for the time being. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen weren't worried about this. When the Zhentian faction came to search again tomorrow, the two of them would leave directly. Once they escaped into the Chaos Ring, no one would be able to find them. For the whole night, the Zhentian faction didn't stop moving. Almost all the cultivators stayed in the inn, and the figures that appeared outside the inn all belonged to the Zhentian faction. However, for the whole night, the Zhentian faction didn't find Bailey Hongzhuang and Kong Wei's figures. The next morning, when Ziren went downstairs to inquire about the news, he found that he didn't see any figures of the Zhentian faction. Even the figures outside the inn had disappeared. This unexpected calm made Ziren frown. This situation seemed a little strange. The movement of the heaven-shaking faction this time is really not small. It is said that the leader of the heaven-shaking faction, Gao Hanchun, personally came today. They will not give up until they catch those two. This matter has a great impact on the heaven-shaking faction. If the heaven-shaking faction wants to eliminate the impact, they can only do this. However, no one knows if it's true or not. In any case, I don't believe that those two guys are really murderers. The heaven-shaking faction only wants to use this name to hide from the eyes and ears of others. As for whether that pill is a true chi pill or not, I am also very doubtful. In the hall, everyone had their own opinions. Although the heaven-shaking faction was very impressive recently, but now that the members of the heaven-shaking faction were not here, everyone was naturally discussing happily. Ziren's expression changed slightly when he heard the news. He then returned to his room. Even Gao Hanchun can't sit still. It seems like the impact of this matter is not small. Shangguan Yingying's beautiful face was filled with a hint of surprise. I originally thought that it would take a long time for me to meet Gao Hanchun, but I didn't expect to meet him so soon. With Gao Hanchun's arrival, I'm afraid the situation will become a lot more complicated. Ziren's brows revealed a bit of worry. The original situation didn't make him too worried, but now that Gao Hanchun had come in person, it proved that the Emerald Island had become the focus of the heaven-shaking faction. Most importantly, Gao Hanchun was able to establish such a large force on Penglai Island. It was enough to see Gao Hanchun's ability and means. Chapter 2974. Di Beichen's pitch-black eyes flashed with a complicated light. It seems that we have to meet Gao Hanchun in advance. After all, he has seen the four of us with his own eyes. When the time comes, we must be more careful. He is not as easy to fool as the heaven-shaking faction's members. Ziren nodded slightly. When the heaven-shaking faction's members came to ask about it yesterday, they just fooled them with a few words. The other party mainly wanted to find Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen, so they had been comparing the two portraits and didn't ask much other questions. However, these people didn't expect that Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen could disguise themselves, so they were completely looking in the wrong direction. We must learn more about Penglai Island, otherwise, once they ask, we will be exposed before we can answer a few words. Shangguan Yingying frowned. Their biggest problem was that they didn't know how to disguise themselves as cultivators who had stayed in Penglai Island for a long time. If they could solve this problem, then many problems could be solved. Hearing Shangguan Yingying's words, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but think of the manual she received when she received the spirit stones yesterday. She immediately took out the manual. Looking at it, Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes couldn't help but light up, because this manual actually had a map of the entire Penglai Island, and there was a certain introduction of each island. Although it was only a brief introduction, at least it was much better than them being confused before. We were so busy yesterday that we didn't read the contents of this manual, Bailey Hongzhuang said in surprise. The four of them immediately read the contents of the manual together. After reading it, everyone's face was filled with smiles. Even if it was just an extra map, it was a great help to them. From the looks of it, the distance between Emerald Island and Demon Refining Island isn't too far. As long as we can successfully leave Emerald Island and head towards the direction on this map, it won't take long for us to reach Demon Refining Island, Wen Ziren said. Di Baichen nodded slightly. The distance between the islands here isn't too far. Demonic Refining Island itself is a bit further away from the other islands. The island in the center is Penglai Island, so it seems that both Emerald Island and Demonic Refining Island are at the periphery of Penglai Island. A place like Demonic Refining Abyss isn't suitable to be at the center. If you really want to go there, it's still a place that is further away. Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but think of the bloody ground abyss that was covered by blood qi. If such a place was at the center, it would be really strange. She just didn't know if this Demonic Refining Abyss was the same as the bloody ground abyss. When we came in from the outside world, the first place we encountered was Emerald Island. Gao Hanchun knew that we were new cultivators, so he was sure that we would come ashore on the first few islands. I'm afraid that the Heaven-Shaking Factions members are mainly concentrated on these few islands, which is why they were able to arrive at Emerald Island so quickly after the incident. Di Baichen said in a deep voice. There's nothing we can do about it. Who asked us to know too little, so we can only fall into his trap. Ziren shook his head with a helpless expression. Chapter 2975. Following Xiao Hei's words, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but look at Ziren. She also felt that this was a bit strange. It was fine if she and Di Baichen didn't know enough about Penglai Island. After all, the information they had was obtained from Lan Yunxiao and the others. From the secretive attitude of the Demon Sect's sect master, it could be seen that they were very secretive about this information, so the information they obtained was very limited. When Ziren was different from them. Sect Master Wen was his father. He should tell them everything he knew. How come Wen Ziren didn't know enough about Penglai Island except that he knew a little more about the route and method of coming here than them? Sigh, my old man's personality is very strange. He said that when he first came here, he relied on himself to wander the world. I'm already a group of four with you. If I still need him to tell me all kinds of things, then I'll lack the taste of exploring by myself. He always felt that a young person like me should wander the world by myself, so he didn't tell me anything if he could. I'm also very helpless about this. A smile appeared on Di Baichen and Shangguan Yingying's faces as they looked at Ziren. It was obvious that they already knew. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Ziren, then at Di Baichen and Shangguan Yingying, who couldn't help but snicker. It seemed like she still underestimated Sect Master Wen's strange personality. Compared to Lan Yunxiao and the others who were worried and anxious, Sect Master Wen completely let Ziren grow up. It's been so many years. It's really been hard on you. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head and sighed. At noon, when Ziren and Shangguan Yingying went to the restaurant's main hall to eat. This was now the most convenient source of information for them. In addition, almost everyone was paying attention to the Heaven-Shaking faction, so they could easily find out all of their movements here. However, when the two were halfway through their meal, a group of people suddenly walked into the inn. At the sight of this group of people, the hall suddenly quieted down, and the atmosphere froze a little. Everyone's gaze fell on the newcomers, and their eyes were filled with fear. "Innkeeper, bring out some of your signature dishes." A middle-aged man walked to an empty table and sat down while the people behind him also sat down. When Ziren and Shangguan Yingying couldn't help but look at the middle-aged man. They weren't unfamiliar with this man's appearance at all, because this was the Gao Hanshun they had seen in the video before. The heaven-shaking faction's sect master really came. I didn't expect them to directly come to this in as soon as they arrived. With such a big thing happening, Gao Hanshun naturally can't sit still. However, you have to speak softly. If you cause them to be unhappy, then things will be troublesome. Yesterday, didn't the heaven-shaking factions, didn't find them? Now that they've come here, could it be that they think those two will return to this inn? Everyone was discussing spiritedly and almost lost interest in eating. Their eyes were constantly sneaking glances at the heaven-shaking factions members. Chapter 2976. Hearing this, the shopkeeper didn't dare to neglect and hurriedly walked in front of Gao Hanshun and the others. Faction Leader Gao, Second Faction Leader Lu, I really don't know anything. I only know that it's their first time on Penglai Island and they don't know what spirit stones are. I told them that they can temporarily buy on credit and go to the square to get the spirit stones the next day. Other than that, there's nothing else. The shopkeeper directly said everything. In fact, the people of Gentian faction had asked him about this several times. However, other than the most basic information, he didn't know anything else. As the closest island to the outside world, newcomers often came here. He had long been accustomed to it, so why would he ask too much? Don't you know that our Gentian faction is looking for a few newcomers recently? Didn't you suspect them when you saw them? Lu Jiangang narrowed his eyes, his gaze sharp and piercing. The shopkeeper shook his head repeatedly. He only wanted to prove his innocence. I heard the news before, but I heard that your gang is looking for 4 people, and they only have 2 people. Moreover, they don't look like daring people, so I didn't think about it that way. As soon as these words came out, everyone's eyes flashed with a touch of understanding. The other party didn't look like daring people, which meant that the shopkeeper didn't think the 2 people were the murderers. As a result, everyone was even more suspicious that the Gentian faction was trying to cover it up. Can you tell that a bad person is a bad person at a glance? After being a shopkeeper for so many years, you don't have any eyesight at all. Lu Jiangang slammed the table with one hand, his face full of anger. Do you want to go against our Gentian faction? At this time, Gao Hanshun, who had been silent, suddenly raised his hand and interrupted Lu Jiangang's words. Since the shopkeeper has already said that he doesn't know, then don't make things difficult for him. Seeing Gao Hanshun speak, Lu Jiangang stopped talking, but the unhappy look on his face was still very obvious. We want to catch the murderers. This matter has caused a lot of inconvenience to many people. What's more, the shopkeeper just didn't think of it for a while. If it were you, you might not be able to recognize it immediately. After hearing Lu Jiangang's unreasonable words and hearing Gao Hanshun's reasonable words, everyone felt that Gao Hanshun was a reasonable person. No wonder the heaven-shaking faction was able to develop to such an extent in such a short period of time. A large part of the reason was because of Gao Hanshun. Ziren and Shangguan Yingying looked at each other. Gao Hanshun's method of buying people's hearts was really good. The two of them echoed each other and eliminated a lot of negative influence. It was really not simple. Thinking back to how Gao Hanxia and Gao Hanxiu had pretended to be harmless in front of them, the 3 brothers were indeed the best at pretending. Thank you, gang leader Gao. The shopkeeper hurriedly expressed his gratitude. Yingying, let's go. When Ziren put down his chopsticks, now that Gao Hanshun and the others had arrived, they wouldn't be able to get any more information if they continued to stay here. The most important thing was that they had to quickly inform Di Baichen and Wang Zhong of this news. Since Gao Hanshun and the others had come here, It was highly likely that they wanted to search this restaurant. Once the four of them were found in the same room, it would be very suspicious. Chapter 2977. Ziren took the lead and walked towards the second floor of the inn. Shangguan Yingying was about to get up when she found that the hair clip on her head had fallen to the ground. When she picked it up, when Ziren had already walked some distance away. Just as she passed by Gao Hanchuan's table, a voice suddenly rang out behind her. "Wait!" Shangguan Yingying's footsteps paused, and her expression changed. Gao Hanchuan's men suddenly called out to her. Could it be that they found something wrong? She couldn't help but feel nervous. Gao Hanchun wasn't an ordinary person who was easy to fool. If they were discovered here, it wouldn't be easy for them to escape with their strength. Even though she was nervous to the extreme, Shangguan Yingying's face still didn't show the slightest bit of panic. She turned around and looked at the man who spoke to her, and a trace of doubt appeared in her eyes. "Miss, you look very unfamiliar." As soon as these words came out, Shangguan Yingying's heart thumped, but she forced a smile on her face. "What's the matter?" The man chuckled. "Nothing, I just saw that you are beautiful, so I hope you can sit down and accompany me for a drink or two." Shangguan Yingying, who was ready to fight at any time, relaxed a bit after hearing these words. It seemed that the other party was just lustful, and didn't recognize her. This result was much better than the former. When Ziren saw that Shangguan Yingying was stopped by the people of the heaven-shaking faction, his expression became very ugly. He couldn't help but say, "Wife, we should go back quickly." While speaking, Ziren's eyes couldn't help but fall on the man who stopped Shangguan Yingying. There was a bit of dissatisfaction and fear in his eyes, but his attitude was very tough. Just the way he called her wife was enough to explain everything. "Third brother, we are busy looking for the murderer, don't cause trouble." Lu Jiangang couldn't help but frown. Gui Jun was good at everything, and he was also strong. The only bad thing about him was that he was too lecherous. If it was a normal day in the gang, it wouldn't matter. But now that their heaven-shaking faction was busy dispelling the negative rumors, Gui Jun couldn't help but tease the girl. This really made him feel helpless. Hearing Lu Jiangang's warning, Gui Jun looked at Gao Hanchuan's expression again, and smiled brightly. "I just want to have some fun. If you don't let me, I won't do it." Shangguan Yingying immediately let out a sigh of relief. She quickened her pace and walked to Ziren's side. The two of them returned to the room together. After closing the door, Shangguan Yingying loosened her clenched fist. Her palms were covered with a thin layer of sweat. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen saw that Ziren and Wenxinya's expressions were very strange. They couldn't help but walk up to them and ask, "What's wrong with you two? What happened?" Ziren took a deep breath and said, "We met Gao Hanchun and the others downstairs. Yingying was stopped by them. We thought we were discovered and were shocked. In the end, that guy was just lecherous. Nothing happened. Don't worry," Shangguan Yingying immediately said. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen couldn't help but frown. Although Shangguan Yingying and Wenxinya said it simply, they also understood that the situation just now could be said to be very dangerous. If the other party had bad intentions towards Shangguan Yingying, it would be a direct confrontation. Chapter 2978. Beichen, Gao Hanchun and the others came to this in first. "I think the situation isn't good. Maybe Gao Hanchun wants to search the inn again. What should you do?" When Ziren's face revealed a look of worry. With Gao Hanchuan's strength and eyesight, it would be very difficult for them to hide in this house without being discovered. Although I don't know Gao Hanchuan's true strength, I can vaguely judge that Gao Hanchuan's strength has reached the 8th level of the Purple Realm when we were in the lobby. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen looked at each other and said, "Before they search, we'll leave first. After what happened just now, they shouldn't be too suspicious of you. We'll come back to meet you when we're safe." "Leave?" Shangguan Yingying was startled. "Where can you go if you leave now? The entire Emerald Island is now filled with people from the heaven-shaking faction. As long as they find out where you two stayed before, I'm afraid trouble will be inevitable. Bailey Hongzhuang waved her hand and said with a smile, "You don't have to worry. We have our ways." Ziren couldn't help but look at Di Baichen, only to see Di Baichen nodding confidently. Only then did he feel relieved. Everyone had their own methods. Since Di Baichen and Bailey Hongzhuang were so confident, they must have thought of a foolproof plan. Naturally, he didn't have to worry. Faction Master, in my opinion, this innkeeper really doesn't know any useful information. It's more reliable for us to search one by one. I don't believe those two guys have the ability to burrow through the ground. We can definitely find them. Lu Jiangang said. Gao Hanchun nodded. Although this method is stupid and cumbersome, it's the only thing we can do in this situation. Then we'll start searching from the inn behind. Yesterday, those guys probably didn't search carefully, so those two guys took advantage of the loophole. Today I'll search it myself. Lu Jiangang's eyes flashed with a ferocious light. Those two damn bastards actually dared to slander his heaven-shaking faction. He would definitely make those two bastards beg for death, and have no way to get out. That's right. There's no need to search this inn. Those two guys can't have come back here. Gui Jun nodded. That's not necessarily true. Gao Hanchun narrowed his eyes, and a wisp of a complicated expression appeared on his face that couldn't be considered handsome. He was like an old fox that caused others to feel intimidated. The most dangerous place is the safest place. Perhaps he's really audacious and dares to continue staying in this inn. Hearing this, Lu Jiangang and Gui Jun looked at each other. Although they both believed that the possibility of the other party still staying in this inn was extremely small, the sect leader had always been smarter than them. Since the sect leader had said so, they didn't mind searching this place thoroughly. After finishing their lunch, the members of the heaven-shaking faction immediately began to move. Compared to yesterday, they were even more imposing today, because their leader had personally come. With their faction master here, what were they afraid of? Master, they really want to search this inn. I'm afraid we have to leave quickly. Xiao He quickly returned to the room and reported the news she had just heard to Bailey Hongzhuang. Chapter 2979. Hearing Xiao He's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were not surprised. They never looked down on Gao Hanchun. If they were in Gao Hanchun's shoes, they would have made the same choice as Gao Hanchun in such a situation. The most dangerous place is the safest place. This rule is often ignored by many people, but it is indeed the best way. Ziren, Hongzhuang and I must leave before they search. You two be careful. We will come to you when the time comes. Di Baichen said. Ziren nodded slightly. You two be careful. Okay. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen walked out of the house together and went downstairs directly. They also thought of jumping out of the window directly, but the people outside were all from the heaven-shaking faction. This way they would feel like they were exposing themselves. It would be better to walk out from the front door, which would make them look more confident. However, the two of them were also very clear about the risks of walking out from the front door. Once they were stopped by Gao Hanchun and the others, it would be very troublesome to deal with. But they had no other way now. The two of them walked down the stairs together and saw that many of the cultivators who were eating in the lobby were also going out. Although the heaven-shaking faction's power was not small, it could not stop everyone. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen were slightly relieved. It seemed that the situation was better than they thought. Following the crowd, the two of them walked out of the inn together. However, just as the two of them walked to the entrance of the inn, a voice sounded behind them. Wait. Lu Jiangang slowly walked in front of Bailey Hongzhuang and Bailey Hongzhuang. His sharp hawk-like eyes swept over Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen, and said, "Which island did you two come from?" He vaguely felt that there was something wrong with these two people. They didn't even have the slightest intention of watching the show and directly walked out. They were only one step away from success, but they were suddenly stopped. It didn't feel good, especially after hearing Lu Jiangang's question. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen felt even worse. No matter which island they said they were from, as long as the other party asked a few more questions, there was no guarantee that they wouldn't be exposed. At this moment, Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly thought of an idea. A touch of arrogance and dissatisfaction appeared on her delicate face as she said coldly, "Do we need to tell you where we are from?" As soon as she said this, the person who was slightly stunned was Lu Jiangang. He did not expect Bailey Hongzhuang to suddenly say something like this. It was really beyond his expectations. Once again, he sized up Bailey Hongzhuang and Xiao Luo, only to find that the two of them had an arrogant look between their brows. The confidence in his heart could not help but weaken a little. Could it be that the identities of these two people were not simple? Otherwise, why would they say something like this to him? Seeing that Lu Jiangang seemed to be frightened, Di Beichen also said in a deep voice, "I didn't know that the heaven-shaking faction was so powerful. It seems that the entire Emerald Island will be under the jurisdiction of the heaven-shaking faction in the future." Chapter 2980. The two people in front of him spoke so arrogantly. It could be seen that their background was not simple. Could it be that they were from Penglai Palace? If that was the case, then once these two people sent the news back to Penglai Palace, it would not be good news for their heaven-shaking faction. Although the heaven-shaking faction's current power was not small, it was nothing in front of the Penglai Palace. As long as Penglai Palace wanted to destroy them, it would definitely not be a difficult thing. For a moment, Lu Jiangang looked at the two people in front of him, and did not know what to say. Gao Hanchun also noticed the movement on Lu Jiangang's side. Suddenly, he looked at Bailey Hongzhuang with a look of surprise. "May I know which faction you two are from?" Gao Hanchun slowly walked in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. His calm face was full of politeness, but his eyes flashed with a light that only he understood. He had stayed in Penglai Island for so many years and had seen all kinds of method. Naturally, he would not be frightened by a few simple words from the other party. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Gao Hanchun's expression and already knew that Gao Hanchun was not someone who was easy to fool. If they did not make it clear, they would not be able to leave smoothly. After thinking about it, Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly thought of a faction. 100 Flowers Gate. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her chin slightly. When she talked about the 100 Flowers Gate, her face was full of pride and pride. She did not know anything about the other sections. Whether it was Penglai Palace or Crimson Moon Sect, they were all famous for their strength. With Di Beichen and her cultivation, as long as they made a move, they would be completely exposed. However, she still had some confidence in her medical skills. Although she had not seen the medical skills of 100 Flowers Gate, she believed that there would be no problem in hiding it with her medical skills. Hearing the 3 words 100 Flowers Gate, the faces of Gao Hanchun and others changed. However, this result was much better than hearing that the other party was from Penglai Palace. Lu Jiangang's face became very ugly. He didn't expect that he would actually provoke people from the 4 major forces. Although the members of the 100 Flowers Gate were not like the members of the Penglai Palace and the Crimson Moon Sect, who would attack without warning, among the 4 major factions, the 100 Flowers Gate was the one that no one wanted to offend. That was because the doctors of the 100 Flowers Gate were truly quite capable, and their ability to recruit them was even more impressive. "So the two of you are from the 100 Flowers Gate. My apologies," Lu Jiangang hurriedly said. Gui Jun also walked over to Bailey Hongzhuang and Li Qia's side. He looked at the two of them in surprise and uncertainty. "Since the two of you are from the 100 Flowers Gate, may I ask if you can show your token?" As soon as he said that, Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen's faces turned cold. Their sharp gazes shot straight at Gui Jun. "I didn't know that the people of our 100 Flowers Gate would need to show a token to someone from the heaven-shaking sect. Aren't you overestimating you?" Deep displeasure and anger flashed across Di Beichen's face. His words became even more impolite. Since they had already pretended to this point, they could only keep up the pretense. They had no idea what the so-called token was, so the only thing they could do was keep up the pretense. Chapter 2981. Gao Hanchuan's expression became more and more complicated when he saw the atmosphere between them become more and more tense. Originally, according to his judgment, the two people in front of him could not be from the 100 Flowers Gate. They were very likely tricking him. However, the two people's expressions were flawless. He could not help but wonder if he had made a mistake. Were they really from the 100 Flowers sect? From what I know, the people from the 100 Flowers sect don't go out often. Have the two of you come to Emerald Island to treat the master of the Qinghong gang? Gao Hanchun asked. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen looked at each other. They both hesitated. They had heard of the Qinghong gang before. It was said that the Qinghong gang was a local organization on Emerald Island. They were originally on par with the Heaven Shaking gang, but the Heaven Shaking gang had developed too quickly in the past 2 years, so they had surpassed them. However, they had never heard of whether the master of the Qinghong gang was sick or not. If Gao Hanchun had purposely said something that did not exist to test them, then all the lies they had said before would be exposed if they said yes. How they should answer was truly a problem. If they said no and Gao Hanchun continued to ask, they would not know how to answer either. This was truly a huge problem. When the people in the restaurant heard that Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen were from the 100 Flowers sect, their attitudes had changed. When they looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen again, their gazes were filled with reverence. Now that they heard Gao Hanchuan's words, they all understood. I heard that the master of the Qinghong gang, Yi Li Fei, had some problems with his body. It seems that he hasn't been cured yet, so Yi Li Fei hasn't appeared recently. In that case, it's very likely that these two people from the 100 Flowers sect were invited by Yi Li Fei to treat him? Perhaps. The disciples of the 100 Flowers sect don't usually leave 100 Flowers Island. Only someone of Yi Li Fei's status would be able to invite them. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen originally did not know how to answer, but after learning that Yi Li Fei was indeed sick, they made a decision. Since you know, then why are you still obstructing me? If there's a delay, can you bear the responsibility? Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Gao Hanchun coldly. As far as I know, the Great Saiyan Gang's power on the Emerald Island is much more stable than your Heaven Shaking gang. Following Bailey Hongzhuang's words, the faces of Gao Hanchun and all the Heaven Shaking faction members turned ugly. Some of them even glared at Bailey Hongzhuang. Gao Hanchun came personally this time because the Heaven Shaking faction's movements on Emerald Island were too big recently. The Saiyan Great Faction could no longer stand by and watch. Using this reason, Yi Li Fei had already expressed his dissatisfaction. Gao Hanchun came this time to explain to Yi Li Fei. Given his pride, he naturally did not want to explain to Yi Li Fei. However, a powerful dragon could not defeat a local snake. The Green Great Gang was ultimately a local faction of Emerald Island. In this place, they were indeed inferior to the Green Great Gang. Now that he had been slapped in the face by Bailey Hongzhuang in front of everyone, one could imagine how he felt.